Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Come Boating Winter Adventure Series and tonight's presentation, Rowing to Wild with Leigh Dorsey and Dameon Colbry, about their 10-day row of the entire coast of Maine in 2018. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library. We've been pleased to be able to continue to co-sponsor the Winter Adventure Series with Come Boating this year, and so glad we were able to do it remotely. So thank you for joining us again. The program is being recorded and will soon be on the Belfast Free Library website and YouTube channel. I want to remind you all to please keep your mics muted, and also to please type your questions into the chat box as they come up, and we will pause along the way to answer the questions. Next, I would like to turn the mic over to Carol Kuhn from Come Boating for updates and to introduce tonight's presenters. So take it away, Carol.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. So on behalf of Come Boating, I want to thank Brenda Harrington in the Belfast Free Library for co-sponsoring our final Winter Adventure Series presentation. Brenda's the Director of Adult Programs, and she helps coordinate our presentations. She creates the press releases, she makes the posters, and she troubleshoots video issues. In the past years, we sometimes had 150 people in the Abbott Room for our Winter Adventure Series, and Brenda would be very apprehensive and very concerned about the fire code restrictions. And as much as we really miss seeing each other in person, Zoom allows us to reach a large audience, including many people outside of Waldo County. So thank you again, Brenda. I also want to thank Mickey Green of Come Boating. She recruited the speakers and organized the 3 presentations this winter. And Mickey is shyer than myself, and she's not in front of the camera tonight. So thank you, Mickey. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Come Boating, and then I'll briefly introduce Leigh and Dameon. So Come Boating is, we're an all volunteer run organization, which started around the year 2000. We're dedicated to bringing people together to enjoy and celebrate boating in our beautiful Belfast Harbor and on the Passagassawasakee River. We entertain whatever skill level somebody has. They're welcome to come for experience and to have fun, or to exercise, or for learning. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and donations are welcome. So check out our Come Boating website. We really are missing our in-person activities, rowing in the winter and spring, and community rows in the summer and fall. We miss rowing with new and with veteran rowers, and we miss watching and rowing with the Come Boating youth rowers. We miss their enthusiasm and their bake sales. So we also miss the challenge of the New England gig races, where the Come Boating Belfast teams really excel. We miss hosting our August Come Boating Regatta as part of the Harbor Heritage Weekend. And we look forward to the time when we can all be rowing together and hanging out on our new floating docks, or at the Come Boating shed or picnic table. And Come Boating's community spirit, all-inclusiveness, and embracing of all things nautical are really needed more now than ever before. However, we still have a lot of annual costs maintaining the 3 Cornish gigs and the one 4-person gig and 2 trailers. Insurance alone for the gigs and trailers cost about $3,000 a year. And every year there are significant maintenance costs of the gigs, despite the fact that Come Boating volunteers help with the maintenance. So please consider donating to Come Boating. Our membership was really impacted by COVID-19 last year, with only about 25 members after March 2020. In 2019, we had about 125 members. So we're actively requesting renewal of Come Boating members or new members. It's $25 for an individual and $45 for a family. So if you're not able to make a larger donation, just consider a new or renewed Come Boating membership as a way to show support for Come Boating. This year, we have many donated items: cordage, line, anchors for the All Things Nautical Yards, which we are going to pivot into a virtual sale via Craigslist. So starting in early April, check out Craigslist for donated items, and we'll have them in a series. And I want to thank Lucy and also Sam Green for helping out with this. So now I want to introduce Come Boating's very own Leigh Dorsey and Dameon Colbry. Many of you remember them from last January's presentation of their R2AK, Race to Alaska, which is the longest human and wind-powered race in North America. Leigh and Dameon were the only rowers in that spring of 2019, the 750-mile race from Port Townsend, Washington to Ketchikan, Alaska. So now let's welcome Leigh and Dameon as they take us along the Maine coast. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brenda and Carol and Mickey, for all you've done to put this together. And thank you to everyone for your interest and for attending tonight. Talking in general, something that Jamie and I kind of avoid whenever we can. So embarking on this talk is much more fraught for us than heading out on a 10-day row. So bear with us. But we're excited to talk about our adventure with kindred spirits. And we hope it inspires all of you to plan your own adventure, whether it's big or small. We're lucky to have so many wild places to explore on the coast of Maine. And the more people who have a direct personal connection to the wildness of the Maine coast, the more people will work to conserve it. In the summer of 2018, we rode from Kittery to Lubec in an unsupported through row of the Maine coast, carrying everything we would need and camping at a different island every night.
We set off to explore large sections of the Maine coast that neither of us had ever seen before. Every day we explored new islands and places we didn't even know were tucked in amongst the islands of Maine. Each of the 9 islands that we stayed on through this trip were ones that neither of us had ever been to, generally had never even seen before, from the water or from shore. We were able to do this because of several fantastic organizations in Maine, mainly the Maine Coast Heritage Trust and the Maine Island Trail Association, both of which have worked for years to keep a network of islands publicly accessible along the Maine coast. MITA's website lists over 200 islands in their network, and Maine Coast Heritage Trust has dozens more islands along with onshore sites as well. We're keenly aware that this trip would not have been possible without decades of dedication from the people that work at these organizations, people we've never met, but we are extremely grateful to. We went on what felt like an epic adventure to us, but we only visited 9 of more than 200 islands that are publicly accessible. We barely even scratched the surface. And after 10 days, we rode from one end of the state to the other and ended with a long list of places we feel like we need to go back and explore further.
So our trip was 10 days. We did it in 260 miles. And this is a list of the 9 islands that we stayed overnight at, or one of them, Marshall Island, was just a pit stop, which we'll talk about later. But we didn't know that these would be the 9 islands we would visit when we started. We didn't have all the stops planned out ahead of time. Basically, each night we would look ahead on the charts and choose an island that was along the route and about the right amount of miles away. And, we would look for bailout points and alternative camping spots in case the weather caused us to change our plans. And then we would enter a course for the next day into our GPS. So it was really kind of day by day planning, which worked out well.
Say yellow line.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was drawing on that.
A little disclaimer going forward, it's really hard to take photos while rowing in little boats sometimes, and neither of us seem very willing to stop doing the necessary things in the boat to take photos. We just seem to forget to do that. So we don't have tons. We've tried to make do with what we have and have leaned kind of heavily on Google Earth images and photos from the internet in some cases to fill in the blanks, but feel free to use your imagination during this presentation to invoke some of the Maine coast that we have missed and failed to capture.
I don't know how to erase that line.
I don't know. So we've got a funny yellow line, but I guess we'll just have to move on. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that.
Better at rowing than at operating technology.
So this is our boat. This is Norpa. It's a Savo 650D. It's designed by a company called Puvenapiste in Finland. They're a pretty popular boat there. They're used to row and race on lots of long lakes in Finland. This model is a double sliding seat. It also is made in a single. It's 21.25 4 inches long. It's a 50-inch beam. She's built very light for racing. It's only 110 pounds with all the rowing gear in it. Very light construction, as I said, 6mm plywood. This particular boat was built by our good friend Walter Barron, Old Wharf Dory. So it's a boat that we've been rowing and racing for a couple of years around Penobscot Bay, doing some camping gradually over time, but becoming very familiar and comfortable with this boat.
So in this picture is the boat all fully loaded for the trip right before we left from Kittery. Everything, all our camping gears and dry bags, and these are our poop kit buckets. Other gear boxes, but basically that's everything we need for the trip. And these are kind of some of what we consider to be essential gear for this trip. Again, another plug for MITA. I can't say enough good things about them, but if you join MITA with the and buy an annual membership, you'll get this awesome spiral bound guidebook, which has a page for every one of the islands with a detailed description of the island itself, where to land on it, whether it has poison ivy, whether there's seabirds on it, and who you have to call if you need to reserve the island ahead of time. It's just chock full of information, and it's a great resource for any kind of adventure on the Maine coast. So we had that, and we had our GPS paper charts as a backup for the GPS, and just because it's easier to look at for planning ahead. VHF radios, radar reflector on our boat, which was this longer, oh yeah, in this picture you can see this skinny white thing. It's actually a PVC pipe with crushed aluminum foil. So it's our best attempt to be seen by radar on other boats.
You have to put your cursor over here for them to see.
Oh yeah. And some other things, rowing gloves, very thick seat cushions we found were necessary because you're sitting on your rowing seat for long hours. Water bags, refillable water bags, and a water filter, because on a few of the islands you can find fresh water, but it might be from a dug well or a pond or something. So we had a water pump to filter water.
So this is our route. This is from our GPS track line that at the end of the trip we were able to upload to a map. As you see, our route was determined partially by our goal to go from Kittery to Lubec, but also by our time limits. We had a couple of weeks to do this whole trip in, so we chose mostly as straight a line as we could from point to point where there were campsites available. There are 1,000 other trips embedded in this map. You could spend a lifetime exploring the bays and coves and inlets of the Maine coast. As you know, it's a pretty torturous coastline, but we stuck pretty far to the outside of everything other than Isle Ho, I think, for the most part. It was a time constraint, but it made for a really great trip, and we were really happy with the route we took. But again, you could choose so many different routes to go, or just a section of the coast would keep you busy for weeks.
So I'll pause right here before we get into our kind of day-by-day account of the trip to see if there's any questions, Carol.
No, not yet. Just some positive comments of thanking us for and you for doing this. So no questions yet.
Okay, thanks. All right, so the first day we started in Kittery. Our good friends Wes and Willie were kind enough to haul us in our boat and our gear down to Kittery and drop us off. So we left a little bit after noon, and it was great weather, a perfect end of August day. And we rowed up toward Cape Porpoise, and it being the afternoon in the summertime, southwest winds started to build through the afternoon, which happened just about every day, I think, during our trip. And so by the time we were getting up to Cape Porpoise, they were probably 4 to 6 foot seas coming in, and all of these islands were just awash and breakers. And we were kind of wondering, how are we going to safely get into Trott Island? We were not familiar with the area. So with kind of feeling some anxiety and fear, when we got to this channel, we saw a set of Coast Guard navigation buoys, and we thought, oh, that looks like a safe entrance. So we followed the buoys in, and we got into here, and then we went as far as we could, but then we were on a mud flat. So it wasn't the best way, but it was a safe way. And we ended up, pulling some gear out of the boat, going to set up camp, leaving the boat, waiting for the tide to come in enough so that we could pull it around through knee-deep water around to the campsite.
Luckily, it was an incoming tide and not outgoing, so within a few hours, we were able to just walk the boat around and just wade it over to the campsite.
Yep, and we got our tent set up and everything ready to go right before a thunderstorm came in. But if you were ever going to Trott Island, you might look for this entrance instead and avoid most of the mud flats. Oh, sorry. This is not one of our photos, and it's probably not even Maine, but it's just to give you an idea of all of those breaking waves that we were trying to avoid going into. And, a challenge of rowing on the open coast.
So this is the side of Trott Island you should come in on, and probably what it looked like the same day. This is Norpa. The first morning after we woke up, our first attempt at putting Norpa out on anchor. She's well secured and not going to go anywhere for sure. So our anchoring or boat strategy for this trip was that we had a 21-foot boat, which is pretty light. We could pick up and bring on shore, but we were going a bunch of places we've never been before, and we've spent a lot of time in Maine. And that the shoreline is oftentimes fairly rugged and unpredictable. And so we didn't want to plan on being able to bring the boat on shore. So our plan was to put the boat on anchor every night and leave her out. And so we use a clothesline anchoring system, which works pretty well most of the time. We had about 400 feet of rope for 350 or so, which means it's a loop. So we could put the boat a couple hundred feet away from shore. This was the one and only time where if you have a mud flat and the water recedes 300 or 400 feet from the shoreline, you're going to run out of line. So luckily she rested very nicely overnight on a nice sandy bottom. But that's our first attempt. Not a start, but no harm done.
We had to laugh to ourselves when we woke up and saw that Norpa had managed to stay in the one tiny channel available to her. We were very proud of her. Mm-hmm. So the next day, day 2, started out beautiful sunshine. Our goal was to get up into Casco Bay, which is going to be about 30 miles. And just in less than an hour into our trip that day, we came across this creature, which is mola mola, or an ocean sunfish, which was completely unexpected. We didn't realize that they came up into Maine. And we learned that they're starting to be in Maine more and more as more jellyfish are drifting up here and as the waters are warming. So this might become a more common occurrence. And actually, we ended up seeing 5 of them along our journey. So they are really strange fish. You should Google mola mola and see just how strange they are. They're huge. They're from fin to fin. They're sometimes longer than a human, and they're very slow moving. They're riddled with parasites, and so they're thought to hang out near the surface in the hopes that seabirds will come and pick off some of their parasites. So anyway.
So that was a fun start to the day, seeing this critter. We even got close enough that I could give a little pet, and then we were on our way. But the day took a funny turn pretty quickly. We started out, as you can kind of see from the reflection on the water, bright sunny day, beautiful, bright breeze. Then about an hour and a half or so into the trip, thick, heavy bank of fog swept in very quickly. At this point, I don't know, I guess it's Biddeford Pool, between Biddeford Pool and Cape Elizabeth, kind of out away from shore a few miles. Fog came in pretty fast, pretty thick. We thought about going towards shore, but after the previous day's encounter with kind of breaking rollers coming from the open ocean, it seemed almost more dangerous to try to go to a shore we didn't know in the fog rather than to deviate from our track line. We were headed towards somewhere that we knew. So we decided to keep on our track line with the GPS and go straight across. It was certainly the most uncomfortable rowing situation I've been in, where we were completely encased in fog for 4 hours or so.
It kind of takes everything out of you, because you're so attuned to every little sound, and the sounds carry through the fog in a strange way, so that things that are pretty far away sound really close to you. There were several times when airplanes going overhead sounded just like lobster boats approaching us. So it was stressful, and we were in a busy, probably the busiest part of the coast of Maine, rounding Cape Elizabeth and crossing Casco Bay. So we had our radios turned on, and we were making security calls, which is sort of an information call to let other boats know that we're in the area, giving our name and the type of boat we are, and our location and our direction and speed, and listening intently to the security calls from other vessels and keeping track of where these other big commercial vessels were, and just being extremely careful. But we would not recommend ever being in those conditions. It's not fun.
One surprising encounter we had in the fog was a large commercial size type lobstering vessel, probably 60 feet or so, appeared off our bow, stationary. They weren't moving, and they showed up. We couldn't see them until they maybe 50 yards or so in front of us. And so we rowed over to them just to ask if we were visible on radar, because we really didn't know. We had our little radar deflector in our little boat, but he laughed and said, "Well, we don't have our radar on." And so that was kind of an awakening thing for us you just assume that people are looking out for each other out there to see, but not always the case, I guess.
Leah, let's see, there are a few comments, and one person asked if Leigh could move closer to the mic when you speak. Okay. And then let me see if I see the others. Let's see. Mark said you had some pretty major crossings looking at your route. What were the challenges with the longer open crossings? And then someone else says, what did you bring for food, cooking, and firewood?
Okay. I think we'll save the food and cooking question till the end, maybe, but because we're talking about crossings right now. We use a GPS, and that's one of our most important tools, especially for those long crossings, because it's showing us our actual course over ground. So if the wind or the currents are acting on the boat may not actually be moving in the same direction as it is pointed. We might be pointed one way, but wind and current might be pushing us in a different direction. And it's really hard to tell that on the water, but the GPS takes all of that into account. So that's a huge part of making those big crossings, is having that tool. And other than that, I think, we've gradually worked up to being comfortable in bigger and bigger waves, because we know we're going to encounter those out there. So it's just, we've gotten pretty comfortable in it, but it's time to learn how to row together and row well out in the swell.
One of the great things about, up until this particular trip, we had almost completely rowed up in Penobscot Bay, Belfast Bay, Upper Penobscot Bay. And most of the big ocean swells have kind of attenuated at that point, or, you get a lot of chop and kind of higher frequency waves. Out on the more exposed coastline, it's really wonderful. You can have 4, 5, 6 foot swells, and you just ride up and down over them, no problem. So it's really a different type of rowing, unless the wind can pick up and turn it into a more choppy experience, but a lot of the time it's really quite nice rowing out there. Most of the days we had, pretty lovely rowing even across those big spots,
Yeah, I mean, I would say sometimes it's actually better to be offshore. There's a lot of turbulence, especially around headlands, in Maine's notorious rocky shoreline. Sometimes it's nicer just to be out away from it all. The swells are more predictable.
Yeah, I would say being hyper vigilant about the weather forecasts, which almost everywhere we were along this coastline, you have VHF marine weather forecast, but we had cell service, so we were able to get detailed weather forecasts as well. And if the wind were going to pick up or the fog were going to be predictably heavy, we wouldn't make a big crossing. So knowing your limits and not when to go across, I think, is the most important thing. Yeah.
Hi there. Three questions in the chat room. Would you suggest navigation lights, and how and where did you mount the GPS? And then another person, do you use AIS, both transmitting and receiving?
We do not use AIS.
We don't row at night, so we didn't use lights. And we've seen lights. I guess the only application for lights for us would be maybe fog, but we've seen small nav lights on boats in fog, and to us, they don't help. You don't really see them, I don't think. So I guess we don't use nav lights, and we don't row at night. It's just because we're so small. And then what was the other one? Oh, where do we mount the GPS? Right by Leigh's right foot, I think, is usually where it sits. Yep.
Yeah. Somewhere where I can catch little glances of it at the catch of at each stroke.
Yeah, and it's a small handheld Garmin GPS unit. It just sits on a crock or on a shoe or something. Yeah.
We have a bungee cord for it now. We've upgraded from the crock, from my shoe. Yeah, and AIS would be a great idea. AIS transmits your boat name and location to other boats, and it also, you can receive other boats' names and their location, but I've spent a little time looking into it and haven't found a setup that would really work in a small rowboat without having batteries or other electronics, but it might be out there, but I haven't found one that worked for us. But it would be a great safety thing to add if it were possible. So we were really relieved to get to Jewell Island after that foggy row. And do you want to talk about Jewell?
Yeah, so Jewell Island's an interesting island. Never been there, didn't really know what was there. It was nestled up into Casco Bay, so pretty popular place. Lots of people in the Casco Bay area. I think it's kind of a day destination for kayakers and, as you can see, sailboaters. Lots of camping there. But what's really unique about it is there's lots of World War II ruins there. It was part of a Portland Harbor defense strategy in World War II. So you can walk around and there's old buildings and fire hydrants in the woods and 3-story concrete observation towers. There's old gun batteries. It's really fascinating to walk around in little pieces of the past that were never used, luckily, but kind of surprised to find them right behind the tent where we were sleeping. Yeah. And the whole island is kind of peppered with these little gems. So we got a chance to explore those for a little bit, and then big thunderstorm moved in, so we hit the tent for the night. Yeah.
Yeah, so our next day, day 3, was by far the longest day of our journey. Not necessarily on purpose, but it ended up that way. It was an interesting park because we crossed all of these river mouths along the way. So that was cool to notice the little differences in the currents and the waves in those spots. We passed the Gwyn Island, which I guess you can camp on, and that's the place we want to go back to. The lighthouse there is the highest light above sea level for any Maine lighthouse. And then we stopped at the Cuckolds, where there's a historic lighthouse that had been turned into a luxury inn. And Dameon had contacted the innkeepers ahead of time and asked if we could stop and fill up our water jugs there. And they had very nicely said yes. And so we pulled into this, to their dock, and they filled up our water and gave us muffins and fruit, and it was great. we had briefly entertained the notion of camping on the western Cuckold because it is listed in the MITA handbook. But after looking at it, we decided we would row 15 more miles just because it's just basically a rock. And there weren't a lot of good places to land or to unload the boat. So we kept going.
We left it to the many seabirds that seem to be quite at home there.
Yeah.
Quickly to just talk about water. Water is kind of the biggest challenge if you don't want to go onto the mainland for days at a time. So we carried 3 days at a time, 3 days worth of water at a time. We had to figure out ways to get water. We didn't want to waste half days at a time going in and off the shore to restaurants or whatever place businesses along the shoreline. So this was one of the solutions we came up with to basically find a water source right on our route and then keep moving right along. So this was the first day we had to stop and do that.
There's three questions, if that's okay. Maybe there was 4. What were the dates of your trip? How many days, and how do you keep everything charged? And were the paper charts a way to identify shoals?
I have here, let's see, the first date of our trip was July 27th, 2018. And so that goes for the next 10 days. We charged things. We had a little tiny fold up solar panel. I think it was 28 watt solar panel, little tiny thing that fold up the size of a textbook. And that did plenty. It did great. It charged things very quickly.
But all we had to charge was our cell phones.
And VHF radio, and that was fine. They would charge in a few hours. Yep. And
the GPS was run off of batteries.
Yep. Was that it? Was there another one?
Oh, with the paper charts to identify shoals?
Yes, and as a backup in case our GPS failed, and we dropped it over the boat and it floated away or something like that, just so we had backup and confirmation.
Yeah, the shoals, we purchased the marine chart addition to the GPS. So the GPS would show everything on a normal nautical chart, but we just wanted a backup to have the paper charts, and you can see a lot more on a big paper chart than you can on a 2-inch screen. So for route planning, it was nice to have the paper charts.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to zoom out to a 40-mile window on a little handheld GPS that has like I think it's a 2.7-inch screen. It was nice to have a big full-size chart to look at rather than that little tiny screen. Yeah.
So this is Bois Island, where we made it to at the end of that long third day. It was 39 miles. Oh, that was the other question. We would row anywhere from 6 to 9 hours a day, roughly. So this was our longest day at 9 hours, I think. And this picture shows the kind of a typical landing on a Maine island. I mean, you're lucky if you can find a beach, and we did sometimes, but sometimes it was just pulling out on, rockweed covered and barnacle covered rocks like this.
And so this is Norpa appropriately anchored, and how she looked the rest of the nights out at anchor, pretty happy. And on that little clothesline, it's great. You could pull her back to shore or send her back out to anchor anytime you wanted. This is Bois Island's bar at low tide. Another great island, definitely go back to. Small, only a few acres, maybe less than 5 acres, I think. But really nice. It has several tent platforms up high, gets you up in the breeze, kind of above, away from the tide line. So it's pretty bug free that I recall. Nice view of the sunset. Nice island. Highly recommend it.
I guess there's a lot of bar islands in Maine. This is the one in Muscongas Bay, just north of Pemaquid Point. All right.
Day 4 was a short, funny day. We rode for, let's say, 6 hours, but we only went 21 miles. And the reason for that was this took us to the western side of Penobscot Bay, and we wanted to go across most of Penobscot Bay, across the southern part of Vinyl Haven and over to off the Stonington area the next day. So we had to stage ourselves. So we had a short day, so we took full advantage of it. We did go on shore, the trail, and went into Tennant's Harbor and found this lovely little Luke's lobster, and had lobster rolls and ice cream, I think, and a beer, and bought sunscreen, which we seem to be going through at an alarming rate. and shoved off again, and then headed off to Seal Harbor, where we found Cylends Island.
Yeah.
Cylends. This is not how you spell Cylends, it's how you pronounce it. It's right.
Yeah.
C-Y.
The MITA book spells it Cylends, but Cylends Island, a tiny little island in Seal Harbor, which is great if you want to spend a night in feeling like you're in someone's backyard, kind of from three sides. You're surrounded by nice houses. But it was a great jumping off point for crossing both channels of Penobscot Bay, which we intended to do the next day. And at the time, there weren't a lot of other good camping options in the area. Now there's Monroe Island off of Owl's Head, which has 2 wonderful camping sites, but that was not an option at the time.
I think the only other option at the time was a lovely place called Nettle Island, which didn't sound too appealing by the name or the description, so we picked Cylends. So in case it's kind of hard to follow along with the little blown up maps from day to day. So here's where we are now. We're almost halfway mileage-wise up the coast. We're on the west side of Penobscot Bay, ready to jump off and head across there. So just to kind of get your orientation about where we are.
Yeah, and I think if we didn't live in Penobscot Bay and if we hadn't spent a lot of time already doing island camping trips around the bay, we probably would have ventured in because there's a lot of great parts of Penobscot Bay, but we've been there. So we decided, we haven't rowed across the southern end of Penobscot Bay. So we did that. And luckily the day we did it, we had perfect weather for these big crossings, just nice and calm in the morning and only kind of a moderate southwest breeze in the afternoon. We kind of threaded our way through the Muscle Ridge Islands and just fell in love with those islands. They're absolutely gorgeous. And then kind of a just really easy trip across the mouth of the Western Channel. In the Eastern Channel, we saw our second mola mola, which we briefly thought was a shark, but upon closer inspection, we realized it was not the dorsal fin of a shark, but just the funny little flipper of the mola mola sticking up. And over to Harbor Island, which is on Merchant Row, south of Stonington.
Rowing across Penobscot Bay, this portion of it was exciting for us because we've done most of our rowing up in the Belfast area or north of Islesboro, in that area. And so we always looked out and could always see south onto the open ocean and thought, well, that'd be cool to row down there someday. I wonder what that's like. And so it was fun and exciting for us to finally go across the southern part of Final Haven and check it out. Yeah.
So we made it to Harbor Island, which was gorgeous. We really liked it there. Up until dusk, which is when the mosquitoes come out. So just be aware of that. Then you have to be in your tent. There's no choice. But it's a really great island. It has camping sites on this. We were on the southern side, but there's another group of campsites on the northern side. And just really lovely, big, smooth granite ledges all around. So yeah, just a beautiful, beautiful spot. And a nice sunset. This is probably right before the mosquitoes all came out and we retreated.
So day 6, Harbor Island, headed over towards Crow Island, towards which is just a little southeast, I guess, of MDI. 26 miles, but it took us 8.5 hours, and that's because our old friend the fog decided to come back. You can see this little picture in the left-hand corner of looking out from harbor in the morning and seeing the fog bank kind of coming in and coming out. Sometimes it's kind of shifty, it seems, and you can't tell which direction it wants to go. But we decided to be bold and optimistic and head out. We knew that they were a series of islands along the way, so maybe that kind of emboldened us a little bit to head across, knowing that we had some places we could duck into, which turned out to be the case.
Yeah, I think we were a little inexperienced with reading the fog at that point. anyone who had any experience with the fog on the outer coast would have known that seeing this fog that close meant it was going to be with us pretty shortly, but we didn't quite realize that yet. But it was with us pretty shortly. Somewhere around here, the fog set in, and so we made our way to Marshall Island to wait it out. This is a parting shot of Harbor Island that morning. And we're headed this direction into the fog. I don't know why we left, but we did. And this is Marshall Island, Sand Cove on the eastern side of Marshall Island, which is just gorgeous. We felt like we had, gone through a portal and ended up in the Caribbean. Just this beautiful sand beach.
So Marshall Island's a cool place, not only for its beautiful beaches. It's got this great cove. It's got some interesting history. If you look at the satellite imagery in the 70s, I believe, the place was slated to be developed for real estate. They drilled wells several places in the island. And if you look at the satellite image, you can see landing strips were constructed, prepared for people to live on the island. Things didn't work out. And so luckily the Maine Coast Heritage Trust has secured this place now. There's three separate camping areas on the island. Good anchorage for boats, great place to row in or paddle into. There's some hiking trails that we explored. We hiked up to the top of the mountain, up to the airstrip while we waited for the fog to go out. This is Leigh demonstrating how to hand pump a well. We thought we hit the jackpot for a water source, but it turned out to be kind of an orangey, rusty colored water that we didn't feel like was wise to put through a fine ceramic filter. So we left our water bags empty that day, but still a fun trip. Good way to kill some hours.
I do have 3 questions, if that's okay. Let's see. Where did you get the charts and how many? What type of tent did you have and did it work well for you? And what time would you typically end your day and make camp on the island before dark?
Okay, the tent, it's a 2-person Marmot Limelight, I think is the name of it, I believe. Love it. We've used it. We used it for this whole trip. We used it on the entire trip for the race to Alaska. We've used it hard, and it's held up very well. Yeah, always ended up dry, bug-free. I have yet had to repair anything on it, so highly recommend it, and very affordable tent. Charts, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, I think we splurged on the waterproof MapTech charts, we found them at Hamilton Marine. They're pricey, but we decided it was an investment and hopefully we'll get a lot of use out of them. And we really felt we needed the backup in case the GPS fell overboard or, any number of things could go wrong with the GPS. And what was the other question?
Oh, sorry, Carol, what was the third one?
When would you sort of end your day and land on an island?
Right. Yeah. Right, thank you. I would say usually by 6 or so.
Sometimes earlier.
Sometimes a little earlier, depending on if we felt like we couldn't go to the next available site. Or sometimes, but I would say on average around 6 o'clock, I think. By the time we get to the island, anchor the boat, set up camp, eat, and go to bed. We can't seem to do that in less than 2 hours. And we didn't like to operate too far into the night because they're all unfamiliar places. So try to be there by 6, 7 at the latest, so that we're not fumbling around in the dark too much. Yeah.
Yeah. So we spent a couple hours on Marshall, and then the fog was clearing, and we left. And the fog came in and out a couple more times that day, but finally we made it to Crow Island, which is in the Cranberry Isles. It's between the Cranberry, it's like in the middle, I guess. And we got there right before some really dense fog rolled in, which you can sort of see starting to come in this picture.
Yeah, that you should be able to see Cadillac Mountain, I believe, right off the.
Yeah, it's there in the fog.
Mm-hmm.
So this fog came in that night, and it stayed all night, and it was there in the morning. And we woke up and listened to the weather, which was bad. It just said fog and wind for the next 3 days. And we were actually pretty concerned at this point that we might not be able to finish the row in the time that we had allotted. You know, we had family members watching my kids, and we didn't have an endless amount of time to do it. So we started thinking we might have to bail. It was a very stressful morning, but we ended up packing up all of our things and making the decision, if the fog had cleared by noon, and if we were able to leave the island by 1 at the latest, then we would be able to make our next campsite, which was at Bois Bubert Island off of Petite Manan. And luckily the fog did burn off right at noon, and we headed to the general store, filled up our water bags, and headed off for that next day. So this is showing that day starting at Crow Island in the Cranberry Isles, and starting in the afternoon meant that this day was really rough water, because of, you know, usually we have the morning hours to put in some miles on some nice flat water, but this afternoon was just rough the whole time. But we saw a couple more molas. That was exciting, and we got to see Schoodic Point from the water, which we had never seen, and it was neat to see it from that perspective. We saw our first puffins of the trip on this day, which is really cool. There's a puffin colony here in Petite Manan, and this is the lighthouse that's out there. It's really stark, very tall. I think it's the second tallest lighthouse in Maine, and it was just great. So we have a video of what it looked like to row in that water, and just bear with me because we weren't able to get it to, the embedded video doesn't work, but I think I can bring it over. This is that day. Might get a little boat. Maybe right now, grab and board this one.
For some reason the video doesn't like to play very well.
Jesus. We almost got that. Okay, so that gives you a little taste of what it's like. And let me get myself going again here. Okay. Sorry. Okay,
So you want to talk about Petite Manan?
yeah, so shortly after that video, we got to the bar at Petite Manan, which was kind of a very memorable part of the journey. I'm going to go back to that slide. So from the point of Petite Manan Peninsula out to the island where the lighthouse is, there's a 1 mile long gravel bar, which is pretty shallow. And at its most shallow points, it can get to only 6 feet deep at low tide. So the waves that are being pushed by that, you know, that standard southwesterly wind up the coast of Maine just hit the bar at the perfect angle, just right into it. And the bar drives the waves up, and all of a sudden we went from, you know, 3 to 4 to 5 foot, probably 3 to 4 foot swells to 4 to 7, maybe a couple 8 foot, really steep, choppy waves that were coming from every direction, and just felt like we were in a washing machine. So
you go from these really nice, organized sets of waves that are coming in fairly predictably, and then all of a sudden they just start popping up in all different places around you. And it's, yeah, the washing machine analogy is as good as long as I can think of it.
So it took all of our concentration and all of our balance and all of our skills to stay upright and row through that. And at one point we looked up, and above our heads in the top of a wave was a jellyfish. So that was exciting. But I mean, surprisingly, not a lot of water came into the boat. We kind of bobbed along over it all. And then on the other side of the bar, it's kind of like being on the other side of a breakwater. Like if you think about the Rockland breakwater and how there's waves on the one side and then the other side is protected and smooth. It was almost like that on the other side of the Petite Manam bar, which was really cool to experience.
It was very welcome after not sure how long it took to go across the bar. It probably wasn't more than 10 or 15 minutes, but
It was probably
it
5.
seemed a lot longer. Yeah, probably 5. But it was nice to get across there, and all of a sudden it's just calm with some little gentle swells. So it was quite nice. Yeah. And so on we went to the destination for the night, which was
Bois Bubert.
Bois Bubert, which I have trouble with sometimes pronouncing.
We're probably not pronouncing it right,
Mhm.
but it's part of the Maine Coast Islands National Wildlife Refuge, and we had to call ahead to make reservations at this spot. But we got there safely. We were very relieved to get there safely after crossing the bar, and it was a beautiful, beautiful spot.
It's a great place. It's a big island. I think it's a little over 1,000 acres. Lots of exploring to be done. We had a late start leaving Crow at afternoon, so we didn't get in here till I think probably 7 o'clock. We put the boat out, made dinner, made camp, and I think this is the worst mosquito experience of the whole trip. We even had to eat in the tent. They were so fearful, but beautiful place. Really love to go back and explore. Hope we get a chance to someday. Great place to go.
So maybe that was a good time to talk about the food and cooking and firewood question. Firewood is easy. We just didn't have any. I don't think we made any fires during the trip.
No.
It was late July, early August, so there really wasn't a need to for warmth. And for cooking, we brought a jet boil stove, and maybe a pocket rocket too. Do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so everything was pretty much dry goods for the whole trip. Everything was packed ahead of time, sectioned out by each day, so there wasn't a lot of rummaging, trying to put things together. You could pull out the day's bag and it had all the snacks, lunch. Well, no lunch. Lunch was snacks, but breakfast and dinner all portioned out. So it was all very organized, so we didn't have to spend a lot of time looking around for things. But a lot of dry goods, for breakfast is like muesli, which, you just soak overnight like an oatmeal. Dinner was couscous, lots of ramen, quick cook ramen, things that didn't take a lot of time to cook. They didn't use a lot of fuel. So basically anything you could boil. Yeah. Lots of snacks during the day.
During the day, what we always do on long rows is stop every 45 minutes or one person stops at a time on a 45-minute cycle, and just take five minutes-ish to eat a few bites, eat a power bar, drink water, drink electrolytes, and we just continue doing that all day long, every 45 minutes. So we don't really stop for lunch, but we're continuously taking in calories during the day.
So that's day 7. Day 8.
Questions?
What? Oh, are there any questions, Carol?
Yeah, there are 3. So another rower, Nicole, wants to know, did you have any issues with ticks and brown-tail moth? And and someone else asked, how far ahead were you calling to make the reservations?
Ticks and moths, none that I'm aware of. Calling ahead, usually the same day, because maybe most 48 hours, we didn't know where we were going to be. So we would call. I don't think anybody ever picked up a phone for any place we called either. We left messages.
Bois Bubert did.
Oh, Bois Bubert did, sorry. So the day before is the earliest, because we just didn't know where we were going to be. Yeah.
We tried to choose places that didn't require reservations just because we knew that we didn't have a plan. So, but it worked out well. We never got to a place where we couldn't camp. So this is day 8 out of day 10. We're almost there. You guys probably feel like you're on day 8 here with us. This was just a super nice day. No fog, no wind to speak of, just really gorgeous islands. It's fun to row through this narrow channel between Jonesport and Beals. There's lots of islands in this area that are part of the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge. So they're seabird nesting habitats, and you can't really visit them because there's restrictions a lot of the summer, but they're gorgeous to row past. So this was just a great day.
This was one of my favorite stretches because of all these islands. We went by some really neat ones for high cliffs and bluffs. We went by places like this, which is the Nash Islands, Little and Big Nash. It seemed like kind of a throwback to Maine's past. They still, it's uninhabited by people, but they still graze sheep on it all summer long, which is pretty cool, I think. And it's kind of neat to go by there. There's, sheep out there. So then we went through the Jonesport channel. I don't know the name of the channel.
So I'm just erasing our spots here.
Oh. All right.
All right. So,
But pretty uneventful day. It was beautiful weather, pretty glassy water, no big winds.
yeah, I have
pretty
another
easy
video.
miles.
I don't think the video is going to work though.
We had a little video. I think we're going to skip it though. It's the last one didn't play very well.
So the next video, it was going to be in contrast to the last one and just showing really nice, glassy, smooth, awesome water. But we'll skip that in the interest of time.
This is one of the little islands we passed as part of the National Wildlife Refuge. This was the Brothers, I believe. Cool. There's a lot of these types of islands in that area where they're just kind of mossy, grassy, treeless islands that kind of just rise up and have steep kind of headland type features to them. Nothing but birds out there, which is really cool. And you can go to these islands some parts of the year. You just have to be careful and check ahead and find out when. Yeah. We went during a time when we were not allowed to land.
Passing by this island, we felt like we were in Ireland or Scotland. It was just so cool.
Yeah.
And we made it to Cross Island right before some more fog set in. And this is a really interesting island. It's 1,500 acres, and it's mostly owned by Maine Fish and Wildlife, but managed by the National Wildlife Refuge. And there's 20 acres right around where we camped, which was an old Coast Guard station, but is now owned by Outward Bound. And I guess they run some trips out there, or have in the past. They didn't seem to be active in 2018 when we were there.
Mm-hmm.
But you can go and explore the old Coast Guard house and read the logbook. It seems like there's a lot of faithful fans of Cross Island who go there every year and write in the logbook. So that was really fun to explore. And this is the old boathouse for the Coast Guard. And right across from Cross Island, you can see all of these towers. It's the Cutler very low frequency transmitters, which are kind of a weird scene. It was good. I don't know. It added to all of the interesting things about Cross Island, but this is right across the way in Cutler. It was built in 1961 to transmit very low frequency messages to submarines in the North Atlantic, and was the largest and most powerful transmitter of its kind at the time. And it's still there in Cutler. So that's just an odd tidbit. But Cross Island is beautiful and had lots of trails and tons of places to explore, which came in really handy the next day.
So day 9, our old faithful friend again, the fog returns. And as you can see, we have 0 miles for today. This was the only day we didn't go anywhere. It was a pretty easy decision, unlike other days, for 2 reasons. The first being we woke up and the fog was so thick we couldn't even see across the channel to the listening station. I don't think you could see 100 yards in the fog. And the other reason was we were staged from Cross Island was the last camping spot that we're aware of until you go all the way up the Bold Coast to Lubec. And so it's almost 30 miles. I don't remember exactly what, high 20s. And so if you go, you're going. And so you better go on the right day, I think. There's at the time, I believe there is now one water access site on the Bold Coast, which is thanks to MITA.
I think more than one, maybe.
So MITA has provided now sites on the Bold Coast Trail, which is outstanding. At the time, there weren't any, so we didn't want to be ditching somewhere we weren't supposed to. So it was an easy decision, but it worked out well. If we're going to stay 2 days on an island, Cross Island would be the one I picked. Thanks to Outward Bound's presence, there was a series of hiking trails that zigzagged across, back and forth across the island, so we could go hiking. There was a well there. There's an old cement well, so we could get water, get a good water source.
So this is the Coast Guard station in where we camped right here, and hopefully you can see my cursor. Yeah, we hiked over to this beach and did some other hiking around this bay. Yeah, it was actually really nice to have a day to kind of explore and not feel like we had to go anywhere. So this is that beach that I pointed out, and the awesome storm berm. It's hard to tell in the picture, but it's maybe 30 feet high to the top of the storm berm. Really, really cool. And we just kind of hung out and read Rachel Carson books, and as the tide went out, it exposed these really awesome tide pools. And we spent a long time going through the tide pools, which were some of the best I've ever seen. And just wild colors and critters. There's some sea anemones in here. There's another little one.
We can't help ourselves when it comes to tide pools.
I get really excited. I don't know nearly as much as I should about them, given how much I love them. All the pink stuff is coralline algae covering the rocks, this encrusting organism. And just everywhere you look, there are all kinds of creatures. I love the sea urchins and all the crevices. There was a rock eel that we saw also, but we did not manage to catch a picture of him or her. And this really cool green stuff is called crumb of bread sponge. And that's all I know about it, but I get really excited when we see that in a tide pool.
That's how we filled our day.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. This is a rock crab or peaky toe, I think. And these just gorgeous curtains of rockweed covering everything. So really fun day on Cross Island in the fog. Much more fun than our days on the water in the fog.
So next day, oh, yep.
Sorry, they had some questions, a lot of comments about the beautiful pictures, but let's see. One person, Robin, wonders if you were overly hot or warm or overly chilled while rowing. And how did you anchor the boat? Somebody's wondering with 2 lines. And how did you take the underwater pictures?
So
the pictures are actually just with my cell phone, and the water is so clear. And the light, I guess the light was right with it being a foggy day, that they're actually taken from the surface with my phone.
Hot or warm while rowing, or we just layer up or down. I don't remember ever. I guess there were some hot days, but it was quite manageable, I think. Yeah, you just have the appropriate layers to shed or don or off.
I think the coast of Maine in the summertime is some of the most perfect weather for rowing. In terms of temperature, it's because you get pretty warm rowing, but there's always a nice breeze, or most of the time there's a good breeze. So
yeah, you might be still breezeless in the morning, but there's almost always something in the afternoon during the hottest part of the day. So it's usually not an issue. Yeah, no, I remember being pretty comfortable. The anchoring system, I'll do my best to, yeah, so if you Google a clothesline anchor setup, you'll see it. It's just picture a clothesline, your boat's attached to the line, and there's an anchor on one end of the loop, and the other end of the loop is affixed to something on shore, whether it's a tree or a rock or something. And so the line is allowed to pass through a ring attached to the anchor, so you can shuttle the boat back and forth from the anchor to the shore. But if you Google an image of that clothesline anchor system, I think it's in the MITA handbook too, actually, in the front. Yeah, that'll do more justice to me trying to explain it. I'll muddle it all up. Yeah, but it works pretty slick. The hardest part is if you come in at high tide. It's easy to anchor at low tide because you know where the water, where the sea floor is going to be at low tide. No surprises. But if you come in at high tide, you have to do a little bit of calculation to know what the tide range is going to be. A little trickier. Yeah.
And it works really well when it's working really well, but it's definitely something that you would want to practice before heading off and relying on it. There's definitely a learning curve to the clothesline anchor system.
Yeah, but Maine coast is pretty, for the most part, pretty good. It, tends to get deep fast in a lot of places. So other than the first night, we had no trouble with it. We always found a place to put it out. You need lots of line though. At least 400 feet, I think, is what we found was appropriate. Yeah. So, so day 10, go ahead.
Last day of the journey, we wanted to make the whole Bold Coast in one shot, and we were working under the erroneous assumption that the slack tide, or the least amount of currents, would be happening in Lubec at the same time as high tide, because in most places that's how it works. High tide is when the tide is changing, is at its highest and it's about to start going out, so there's not a lot of current. But it doesn't work that way in Lubec. So Lubec has a really narrow channel where it's draining all of Cobscook Bay. And the tidal ranges up here are huge. It's really close to the Bay of Fundy. So the tidal ranges are around 20 feet. So a lot of water has to force itself through Lubec Channel, the Lubec Narrows. So we wanted to make sure that we were not arriving at that point at a time when the tidal currents were at their strongest. So we were aiming for high tide. We found out later that slack, the lowest currents are actually 2 hours before high tide. But anyway, we waited till about noon to leave for our timing, and then we set off and we just kind of got whisked along the shore. The tide was going in, so it's going into the Bay of Fundy. So as the incoming tide is flowing north along this whole coastline, and we were just riding it like a river. Even if we weren't rowing at all, we were doing about 3 miles per hour. So it was tons of fun. It was perfect weather for it. And we would just go flying by these buoys like it was just really fun. And we ended up getting up here to Quoddy Head about 2 hours before we expected to. So just by sheer dumb luck, we ended up arriving in Lubec around the time of the slack currents, about 2 hours before high tide. So that worked out well. I remember passing a fishing boat somewhere on the Bold Coast, and the fisherman, this big guy coming out in his yellow fishing gear, taking out his cell phone and taking pictures of us going by, which was kind of funny because the whole time we'd been taking pictures of things that we saw. But we got to Quoddy Head, and there's a couple of whirlpools up here. You have to be really careful, but luckily it was slack tide for us, so the tide pools were pretty minimal. We went right over a few of them and it was no problem, but again,
they're superficial. They're not.
I think that's because of the timing. I think at other times of the day it would have been quite a different story.
But they're fun to go through, and the boat kind of squirrels in one direction or the other. It's kind of neat to feel. These are some of the critters we saw on our Bold Coast trip. So on that day, we saw some swimming puffins. We saw a minke whale. We saw several pods of porpoise, right? Not just a couple, but several pods of them coming back and forth. And this was the first time I'd seen harbor seal or gray seals.
Gray seals.
The horsehead seals, which are much larger than the harbor seals we have here. And well, at the time in Belfast Bay, although the last few years we've been seeing these larger gray seals showing up here too. So it was cool. Lots of wildlife, a lot of variety that day. This is, as you can see from all the labeling, Lubec Channel. A couple of interesting lighthouses as we came around Quoddy Head. The iconic West Quoddy Head light. And then as you move into Lubec Channel, there's a funny style of lighthouse in there called the Spark Plug Lighthouse. And so that's the Lubec Channel light. It's a phase that the Coast Guard went through. I think there's a handful of these along the Maine coast. I don't know where the rest of them are. Kind of a funny contrast to the very iconic, pretty Westcotty head. And then off the distance, you can see Grand Manan Island, part of Canada. But that's Lubec Channel. And international border to Canada runs right down, somewhere down the middle or so. Yep. So here's the home stretch for us.
Yep. So we just kind of sailed right in at the tail end of the incoming tide, and then we were done. We camped at an RV park in Lubec for a night before a friend came and picked us up there. So that's all we have. These are the links to the Maine Island Trail Association and Maine Coast Heritage Trust. And again, we're just so grateful to them for making trips like ours possible, making sure that regular people like us have access to all these islands.
That's great. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. That's wonderful. There's lots of comments in here about fascinating and awesome. And from Mickey and Sam about how you dealt with the fog. They've sailed all over, but sounds like you really had to deal with it. Somebody wanted the spelling, I think, of the tent, and I think that's M-A-R-M-O-T, right? Correct?
Yeah.
Marmot? Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you explain the name of your boat?
The Savo, which is this style of boat or the design, is a Finnish boat, and Norpa is Finnish for ring seal, which I believe is a type of freshwater seal in Finland. I think I was told once. It's ring seal in Finnish.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That was wonderful. And lots of people are writing in and saying thank you for sharing your story, and it was inspiring. And so just really great. And what were the similarities and differences on the journey in, the sentence, it sort of ends there. I don't know.
Maybe between this and Race to Alaska?
Oh, maybe. Yes. And in Alaska and Maine. Yeah. Similarities and differences in the two journeys. Yeah.
They're similar because they're at similar latitudes, similar tidal ranges, moderate to high tide ranges, similar temperatures. So a lot of it was the same, a lot of the logistics, I guess. Difference was this was kind of our trial run at a multi-day rowing trip. So we set kind of moderate goals for mileage each day. We kind of averaged, I think, around 28 miles a day. And on the Race to Alaska, we were shooting a little higher. So I think we averaged closer to 38 or 40 miles a day on that trip. And that difference in mileage made it feel a lot different. This Maine coast row, we felt like we could have kept going forever, doing 28 or 30 miles a day. Race to Alaska felt like, for me, it felt like by the end, I wouldn't have been able to go much longer at that pace. So the pace was a lot different, but the camping and everything was really similar.
Yeah, the Maine, at least, there's almost a town everywhere, along the coast somewhere, not far away. The Race to Alaska was almost entirely on the British Columbia coast. And once you get a few hundred miles up north of Port Townsend, it's pretty remote. You're pretty far away from things. Sometimes we have a couple, 2 or 3 40-mile days before you pass the town. So you're pretty far out there by yourself. I think if you got into a pickle or needed some help or really needed some medical attention, Maine, you could get some pretty quick. British Columbia coast, you're hanging out there a little bit more by yourself, I think. Yeah, so we had to be very, very sure about our planning and our food supply, because we had the same strategy on that trip as well, as to bring everything except for all the water. All of our food was packed before we left.
Oh, I thought of 4 other differences. So,
oh boy.
Whales. There's so many whales in British Columbia, so we had to keep a lookout for them. And logs, a lot more logs are just floating around in British Columbia, so we had to keep an eye out for them. And bears, a lot more bears in British Columbia, so that made camping a little more risky. And then the other thing was, if you can notice in this picture, these two buckets, I mentioned them at the beginning, those are our poop buckets. So we were very careful to carry out all of our waste from all of the MITA islands. And that is something that I'm really grateful we did not have to do on the race to Alaska, just because we weren't camping in designated spots most of the time. And yeah, so that was nice that we didn't have to carry 3 weeks worth of those buckets around. Any
That's
other-
very nice. No,
Yeah.
I think that's enough.
Okay, no more differences.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your next adventure is, but somebody has written in and said that they noticed on Instagram that you're building another boat, and what are your plans for that boat?
Well, Leigh had been planning. You want to talk? You go ahead.
Well, we are building a 4-person version of the Savo, and we designed it to be an expedition boat. So it's a little bit heavier built, and I had hoped to take a team of women to do the race to Alaska this coming year in that boat, but the race to Alaska is canceled because of COVID. So we don't have a specific journey in mind for that boat right now, but
Lots of ideas.
Lots of
but
ideas.
No, nothing in the planning phase.
yeah, but it is built to be an expedition boat. We hope to be rowing it with friends and family this summer and trying it out. It's the first of its kind. So we really don't know how it's going to handle. We're just going to spend this summer kind of testing it out and seeing how it does.
Great, that sounds like fun. Any,
Yeah, I think so.
do your daughters row, Leigh?
Not yet, but there's some interest. And Rose has dabbled in a little bit of coxing. She steered Dameon through a little casual race that we had here in Belfast in the fall. So yeah, I definitely want to get them out on the water and learning all the skills that they need to go on big trips like this.
Great. Well, this is wonderful and really is inspiring. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay. Just getting lots of thanks and comments on the chat, but it's exciting.
Cool. Well, thank all of you.
It was a lot of fun. So it's fun to talk about it.
That was great. Well, thanks for sharing all that with us, and sort of inspiring, and makes us all look forward to summer and getting out on the water, hopefully.
Yeah, people should go. You know, a lot of these, we went to a lot of these places by the route we went there, but almost all these islands you can access by, you can go from a hand carry ramp or something and get to them within a few miles. They're, we took the hard way to some of them, long distances, but you can go to a lot of these places very easily. So people should go. Yeah.
Can you hear me? This is Mickey.
Oh,
What's that?
It's Mickey. Can you hear me?
Barely. I can hear you a little bit louder, Mickey.
I just want to say thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled. This was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And to me, sailing and boating around Maine, it's fog. Fog really scares the shit out of me. And I don't understand. I don't know how you dealt with it in your little rowboat. So.
yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It really can be.
Thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thanks, Mickey.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Leigh and Dameon and everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a good night, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank